Shooting in the tunnel was probably one of the most interesting shoots I've ever done in my life. Also, it has the distinction of being the only one in which we were physically comfortable while doing it, because we were literally inside an air conditioning system. And the summers in North Carolina can be incredibly hot. And even if they aren't, we're doing a lot of physical work in producing. But getting into it was another matter altogether. The door to the tunnel was very small. You literally had to crawl through it. It was a door like a trap door. And then beyond that, you had to crawl on your belly for a few feet before it widened out into the tunnel that you actually see in the movie. Now, that wasn't really a problem because our equipment could easily fit through that space. And now, of course, in the case of the actor, when we brought him in, we made sure that he wasn't wearing his costume until he got into the tunnel and could dress. And there was actually plenty of room for him to do so there. The problem was the set pieces, the door, which took us a long time to create, a lot of work involved there, and it was by necessity rather large. And it's kind of interesting that none of us actually considered that until about halfway through the process of securing the tunnel. And so then, this is after we had all been down there to take measurements. We made sure that the door would fit in the space of the tunnel. We made sure we knew exactly how tall the tunnel was. But then it wasn't until we were having our lunch, after congratulating ourselves on the job, that it occurred to all of us probably at the same time, wait a minute, how are we going to get that into the tunnel in the first place? And then, as solutions to these crazy problems usually occur, the solution just dropped into our laps. I think all three of us said in unison, the air ducts. And this is one of the things we noticed while we were in the tunnel, is that looking up from the tunnel into certain areas, you could see up into the library above. And these were air ducts for the air circulation system. And to my amazement, the ducts were exactly the right size to fit the set pieces. We had about 1 inch clearance where we could actually lower the door, which I had spent so much time building, right down into the tunnel. And that's exactly what we did. Now, the actual shooting in the tunnel, we also had to bring in lighting, and the solution to the lighting difficulty was simply to remove the normal light bulbs from the walls of the tunnel and replace them with 500-watt bulbs. And surprisingly, all these bulbs tended to blow out within a relatively small amount of time, but fortunately they lasted just enough for us to get the scene. And then beyond that, we packed up and left. Finding props for a movie like this is a really exciting experience, and I always think of it kind of like a scavenger hunt where you have a list of things that you're looking for, and you have to go to the weirdest places to find them. And then oftentimes what you find is not what you were originally looking for, but something better. And in the case of the masks, we really hit the jackpot. Originally, when we were designing this, I didn't actually give much thought to what these nameless guards would be wearing. I either imagined them in white coats or I imagined them wearing military uniforms, but the whole idea of these crazy masks had never occurred to me. And what happened was Jerry, the other producer and filmmaker involved with the project, happened to notice these on the internet. And what they are Russian gas masks from the 1970s. These are original Soviet-issue Russian gas masks. And I have to say, just looking at these things, you got to wonder, what in the world were they thinking when they put these things together? Because you have to ask yourself, were they trying to make them look scary? These are referred to as monkey masks because the cheek pieces, which actually contain the air filters, kind of give you the impression of like a snout rather than a face, and you end up looking kind of like a monkey when you wear them, and that's where the term came from. Now, they come in two colors. They come in black and they come in gray. And you would think that the black ones would be scarier. But in actuality, just looking at them, I really think the gray ones were scarier, because essentially, when you put on one of these things, you have no soul. Basically, it removes any trace of individuality that you possibly would have, and the fact that it's got kind of a grayish look, it makes you look like a skull. And that was exactly the kind of look we were trying to achieve. And then to make matters worse, we put a dark filter in the eyepieces so that these nameless, faceless guards, you simply couldn't see their eyes. and the effect was just wonderful.
It was very hot, it was very sweaty, it was very restrictive, and, you know, such as the sacrifices you got to make for art. The chemical suit was pretty baggy, and you know, it was very hot. You know, it was very hot, and restrictive. Movement was restricted a little bit. The only thing was we didn't have any combat boots on. You could see me running around in white t-shirt, white tennis shoes.
I get to play a gas mask wearing scientist, which was actually it was kind of difficult to breathe a little bit, but it was fun. You know, the setup was fun. It was actually kind of tedious, constantly, you know, taking off the mask, putting on the mask, because it got very, very hot inside the mask. It was inside a science building, and it was profusely sweating throughout the entire ordeal. But you couldn't really tell with the mask on, which was luckily for me, because had the mask been off with the camera on me, you would have seen just water everywhere. Well, there were a lot of talented actors there, but the gentleman who played the scientist who ended up going insane, it was quite fun pushing him around on the cart with him screaming like a little girl. Although a little dangerous. I almost got kicked in the face one time, so that was pretty fun. But yeah, I enjoyed working with the project. I'm looking forward to seeing the final video.
The electronics that were used in the project, the little LED security systems, you know, that let people through the doors. And again, we couldn't use real security systems because any facility that would have them probably wouldn't want us in there. And so this was all fake. We basically had a couple of our friends, Brian Deary and Greg Parsons, who are electronics gurus. We had them design them, and they're remote control operated, and they were set up on the doors. Now, the only problem with these things is that there really was only one of them. And so whenever we wanted it to look a certain way, we would have to take the electronics and put it in a particular housing, which would require, you know, gluing it or however they held it together. And then that would be what it would look like. And then when we changed the design for a different area, such as the big security door, and of course the elevator, then the whole thing had to be taken apart and rebuilt, and we really couldn't go back. And so that was one limitation. The other problem was that the remote control device, in principle, worked very well, but you just had to be too close to the unit to make it work reliably. So usually, if it were possible to see outside the frame of the shot, there would be somebody crouched just below the door lock, holding the remote control out and pressing the button for dear life to make it work. But the end result was quite effective, and of course the sound effects were added later. Now the alien itself, and this was crucial. Basically, John Sorey designed the alien head, and we went through several designs for this. Basically what I told him was, if the alien doesn't work, the movie won't work. And of course his response was, well, you know, don't put me under too much pressure, that sort of thing. But the fact is, it was true. We didn't want this to look like a cheap science fiction movie. And the moment we have some sort of a thing that looks obviously like a person in a mask or something like that, you know, it calls into question or calls to mind, you know, Tales from the Dark Side, Tales from the Crypt, all these slasher movies where we can see, you know, the Wolfman, Frankenstein masks and stuff like that. At the same time, though, we couldn't cheat our audience, meaning that the audience has spent the entire movie up to this point waiting to see what the heck is in that chamber. There has to be something there. We cannot cheat the audience, and it has to be something that's worth the wait. And so that's why we put so much emphasis on the alien. Now, we had come through several different designs for the alien, all of which had to involve the use of one eye. We thought about using animatronics, especially since we actually wanted the eye to open. We thought of puppetry. We thought of some sort of a puppet system which would have a puppet head moving along. That didn't end up panning out. What ended up working the best was to think of it instead as a mask and have a very thin person or a child wearing it. And we went with the child. And so Matthew was our alien, and he wore the mask. The mask was actually a custom-made piece of art that was designed based on the drawings that we've been doing. And of course, since it was originally designed to be used as a puppet head, then it had to be redesigned as a mask, which that part was actually relatively easy. There was a kit that we bought online which allowed us to make sculptures into masks. And John Sorey did a wonderful job on this, and the painting was awesome. The only problem is, since it wasn't originally designed as a mask, it really didn't accommodate the human face very well. So anyone wearing this mask would not be able to see, first of all. There's no way you can put eye holes into this thing. And also, it was very hard to breathe. And so we had to open the mouth of the alien, for starters. And we also had to provide some sort of a breathing tube while the actor was wearing it. And we ended up just basically having him in the mask for only a few minutes at a time, because fortunately, all he had to do was look up. And he did. And then the only other minor thing, the finger appendages that John Sorey made worked quite well. And basically the rest of that, we used After Effects to smooth out these things, to provide the blink, because if the eye didn't blink, people would think it was a mask. So we made it blink. The chamber where the alien lived was quite an undertaking, and this actually took almost as long to do as the whole rest of the movie. Now, to get the glowing look, the look of the glowing walls, because we wanted the suggestion of complex electronics, otherworldly stuff, but it didn't have to be specific, kind of like many science fiction movies, but we wanted just a suggestion. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it wasn't very expensive. Now, first of all, the walls themselves, aside from the base material, are made out of styrofoam. And what we used were panels that I believe would normally be applied to insulation in attics. They had they came in rectangular sheets with these indentations in them. And into those indentations we applied Christmas tree lights. Now, on the surface, that sounds like it would be really, really stupid. But the reason it worked was that my wife, Ty, one year, wanted to make a purple Christmas tree. And so she ordered on the internet what we all believed or would have expected to be purple lights. But somebody's idea of purple did not correspond with ours. What we got was kind of a pinkish mauve color, which honestly looked just plain awful. But in the context of the alien chamber, it made it look unique, meaning that I simply don't remember ever seeing that color used in this context. And the result was this eerie wall structure, which we had a great time building and an even better time tearing down. Now, the fun part, the really fun part, came with the alien control panel, because we did not want this to look anything like human technology. And so the idea of these glowing channels of liquid, seemed interesting. Not like the Superman type thing with crystals and stuff like that, but we wanted something that was even more organic looking. And the way we did this is something that I have wanted to do since I was a kid. As soon as I found out about those snap lights, those things that they used to use in camping where you break them in half and shake them up and they glow, I always wondered, because I don't think you could be a kid with those snap lights without seeing somebody take them apart and pour glowing stuff onto the trees and stuff like that. But I often wondered what would happen if you kept the liquid separated, kept the glass vial in one place and the other liquid someplace else, and mixed them just in a glass or something like that. Could you create this glowing liquid in that particular way? In fact, you could. And so our project then was to get as much of that stuff as we could and to create channels of glowing liquid. And that we did. And that was the aliens' environment. The tunnel sequence, the crazy mind-bending sequence that occurs when Fulton encounters the alien, was literally the hardest thing I've ever done. I designed this personally, and it's basically completely computer graphic except for the scenes that exist within it that are actual, that we shot, the court scene, the funeral scene, and the mother scene. All of these scenes were applied to some sort of a digital construct. Now, to make this happen, the first problem was figuring out what it would actually be, because we're trying to make something visual that was not really tangible. We're trying to take a picture of a feeling, kind of like an image that's not of a nightmare, but of the memory of a nightmare. It's like if you wake up from a nightmare, but you don't really remember what it was about, but you get some fleeting thought, a state of mind, so to speak. That's what we're going for. That's really what the story was originally about, is something happening within the person's mind that you couldn't really put into words. And so, as the writer and designer, I had to come up with a way of representing this visually. The idea of having one's mind opened by a higher authority, something that had the ability to reach into your mind and pull out memories. And so the logical sequence, we thought about, shuffling through cards, maybe shuffling through things like that. We wanted it very organic looking. We wanted it to look like what it really was. This mishmash of memories that make up what a person is, and this alien is cruising through it, just picking out things at random, or just following different lines of thought, seeing where they lead, and just not particularly finding human beings interesting, but mildly amusing, so to speak. And so that was what we were looking for. That's what we had to work with. And the idea of a tunnel seemed to make sense. Sort of cruising through a tunnel, stopping at different points along the way. And so then to think about how one would do this. And I wanted to use computer graphics, and I used a program that was actually a very simple three-dimensional program. And I designed the tunnel itself and animated the camera to drive through it, the camera being the point of view that the viewer would see when the animation was done. And in essence, it wasn't all that complicated, and I didn't think it was going to take all that long until I got to the idea of what would the walls look like, what kind of a tunnel would this be. And I didn't want it to look like a metal tunnel, a plastic tunnel. I wanted this to look like something very organic and complex and unique. And I used what amounts to a very simple procedural. That's a type of computer rendering process where it creates a surface based on some algorithm that it has. And the problem with this, though, was that in high definition, which is 1920 by 1080 pixels, that took, on average, about 4 hours per frame to render. And the whole tunnel sequence was well over 400 frames. This was a very long sequence. It was several seconds long. To render this literally took over a month. But the result was actually pretty good. And then, to take it a step further, we brought it into After Effects, which gives us the ability to embellish on these things. And so we created a more of an organic surface for it based on the frame model that was created. And then from there, we added the individual video effects where we would have short shots that would appear to be coming out of the wall. And the last thing that I wanted to do was to make this look like frames of video, floating television sets, that sort of thing. And that is very easy to do in video because that's really what video is, frames. It's two-dimensional surfaces. And so what I did instead was I tried to map the images onto three-dimensional shapes, blobs. I use filters to make things appear bowed or sphere or bent. And then I would attach them to distortions in the wall so they look like warts coming out of the wall that would have movement built into them. And my rule, the absolute rule that I had, was I was never to see a frame edge. Anywhere in the project, there could never be the edge of a frame. Everything had to be curved and moving. And I wanted to follow the camera, to bend the camera, to keep perspective with the camera that was originally used in the animation. And then basically we went from one section of the tunnel to the other, populating it with different visuals that are supposed to be a hodgepodge of memories, many of which you can't actually see what they are, but you can get the suggestion of something there, which is all right with me as long as the overall effect is the same. And then we would take a break and go into individual memories, and that is where we would distort those images using After Effects and to create those disturbing images that we see. And then, of course, adding the sound effects, which was a whole other business in itself. And I think that the most wonderful moment in doing this was when I did the scene in the corridor as Fulton is being wheeled out, because I realized that beyond that scene, I'm back in real time again. And so that's when I realized that this incredibly long process of designing the tunnel was going to end someday. And it was a very rewarding thing to see it finally come together.
Jerry Taylor helped out with the project, and I have been asked to talk to the camera about the Red Rock M2 adapter, how it was used in the project, and ultimately the challenges that it presented. The Red Rock adapter is this magic box. This is the old version of the Red Rock adapter. Since then they have come out with the Encore, which we'll be using on our next film. Basically the Red Rock adapter is a contained unit that has a circular ground piece of glass in it that rotates very, very quickly. Basically what happens is light enters the lens, is focused on this screen, which is at this plane, which is rotating very quickly. Actually, I can take it off and show it to you. It's right in there. It's probably too dark, but the screen is right in there. And the screen rotates very quickly. The image is on the screen. Of course, it's upside down. The HVX focuses on that image. And basically what that gives you is greater control over depth of field. So as you see right now with that camera pointed at me, I'm in focus. That's in focus. That door's in focus. Everything's in focus with that camera. Putting this on it would effectively allow Paul to have me in focus, but that's completely out of focus. With that, he can tell the audience, which is you, that I'm the center of, that I need to be the center of attention, which I always need to be the center of attention. But he can tell you that I'm the center of attention in that shot. Such as throughout the project, you can see that. You can see, such as in the break room scene, you can see that Fulton is completely in focus, while the lady behind him in the break room is completely out of focus. We are telling you to watch Fulton. Don't watch what that lady in the background is doing. Basically, this proves awesome and as far as a storytelling tool, but it becomes extremely hard to shoot because the slightest movement, if he were using the Red Rock adapter on me now, I'm completely in focus now. I'm slightly out of focus now. So as you're going, you'd have to use tools such as this follow focus, which would attach to the front of the camera, gear up with the 35mm lens, and rack focus as you go. So basically that's what that would do. So throughout the entire film, we had to have a very large monitor on hand, which we'd have to watch very carefully and rack focus as we went along to make sure that they were always in focus. Once you get the hang of it, it was pretty easy to go along with, and I think it added a great dimension.
The makeup for the project was surprisingly more complex than we'd originally thought. We used a lot of makeup in the project. Basically this went into several different areas. First of all, we wanted to simulate injuries. There is a part where Lee Armstrong, playing the role of Matt Grimes, is being wheeled out from the security zone, and apparently something terrible has happened to him. He's gone insane, and we wanted to give the impression that he had gouged his eyes out or attempted to do so. And originally, according to the script, we weren't even supposed to see his eyes. He was supposed to be wrapped in a bloody sheet, and he was supposed to have basically ripped half his face off, and you can't see it, and that was the scary part. But after talking with Lee, and he brought out the fact that the eyes are really a very important tool of the actor to convey emotion, and we tended to agree that rather than covering his eyes, we would simply make them appear as though they had been clawed at. And so that was where our makeup artist went to work, and that was John Sorey. He did an excellent job on the eyes and many of the other effects that we did using makeup. The other makeup-related issue in the project had to do with a nightmare sequence. We wanted to create the effect of no eyes at all. and that is a lot easier said than done. But my wife Ty was very instrumental in making this work. She was tirelessly studying the concept of latex and those sorts of effects, but some of the issues that came up were stuff that you wouldn't normally find even in some of the more complex makeup techniques. First of all, just to create the surface on which to adhere the latex was interesting. And what she chose to do was to use Play-Doh of all things. Play-Doh is kind of like a simulated flesh, and this actually worked. We applied Play-Doh to the eyes and then put the latex over this and then applied makeup. Now this was a very difficult effect to do, and the fact that it worked at all was really amazing considering the fact that we really didn't have much of a budget here. And for this reason we really only did it once because there were several problems involved with it that we really didn't anticipate. The first is that to get it smooth enough takes a lot of time and effort, and this is very uncomfortable for the actor involved. And what makes it worse is that working with a blind actor is another issue altogether. Mari Shelton was a trooper in this. She was willing to sit still for a long time while the makeup was applied and be guided everywhere, and she had to wear this for quite a while. And of course, in framing the shot, it was particularly difficult because she could only respond to audio cues. She couldn't see where she was moving, and so basically we just had to do it until by some miracle she happened to land in the right place in the frame, and that was basically how this was done. Okay, and just for a minute, look over here and tell me your name.
Hi, my name is Mari Shelton.
And what are you doing here?
I'm playing the role of the cruel mother.
Okay.
The cool mother or the drunk mother?
The cruel drunk.
Oh, cool drunk mother.
Yeah, cruel, not the cool mother. And the cool mother.
And,
The kind of mother every child wish they had.
okay. And you have no eyes.
And I have no eyes.
Okay. Building the security door or the airlock door was one of the most difficult things I'd ever done, in terms of that kind of craftsmanship. I don't consider myself a carpenter. I don't claim to know much at all about that sort of thing, but this was like a crash course in set design. And I think the end result speaks for itself. Essentially, the airlock door is made out of 2x4s and 2x6s, an oak tag frame, and to get the effect of a door, which required some measurement, we had basically a rectangular frame that would fit into another rectangular frame. And one would be the outside of the door, the other would be the door itself. And to make that have that polished metal look, we used what is essentially nothing more than tin foil, but not standard tin foil. This is aluminum flashing that you can get at a hardware store. It's not that cheap. It's it cost us something, but we overlaid it over the 2x6s. And it gave us this metal look, kind of like the frame of an elevator door would have. And from a distance, and with the lighting we were using, it wasn't half bad. And then, of course, to get the door to slide the way it did, we put a layer of felt along the edges. And it actually ended up working. It didn't end up denting or scratching the aluminum flashing, and so it looked quite natural. And of course, I had to practice several times because I was the actual doorman. Jerry was on camera for that shot, and when Fulton would enter his number into the keypad, I would pull the door back and move it to the side while at the same time making sure I was not in frame when I did. And then Fulton would walk past me, and that was actually quite a difficult process to do, to get good at, and then we never had to do it again. Now the door window was actually harder to track down. We were originally looking for what we thought of as a washing machine window. Kind of like the front-loading washing machines, or I guess in some ways dishwashers would have those things. Try finding one. We simply couldn't do it. They were not available. I looked at parts stores, appliance stores. Pretty much they'll give you a part number and you pay through the nose to order one. But in all honesty, it just wasn't working out. Certainly not efficiently. So then we went back to the drawing board and walked around the hardware stores and the material stores, and then something just jumped out at us, which was, of course, the drain pipe cover or the piping cover that you would find on a roof, especially when we cut the actual rubber piece off and replaced it with a glass panel. And there you have it. There was the door. Producing a movie is one of the most amazing things to do on a small budget. And one of the things that you have to do is be able to improvise some of the most amazing things. For example, there are commercially made dollies, and dollies are things that cameras sit on that allow you to have smooth, steady motions, as you go sort of following somebody down a hallway. Well, wheelchairs are sometimes easier to come by. We use a lot of wheelchairs, and you'd think those would be hard to come by, but they're actually pretty easy. We also use the walker, of all things, one of those rollator things that older people need sometimes, and that made a great dolly. And so hopefully when my mother got it back, it was still in good condition. Another thing that we did is for the driving scene on the empty road, we actually built the camera into the car, which was a lot more difficult than it looks. And we actually controlled it from the front seat of the car because there was no way to actually get into the trunk with it, as you can see there. And that's a good example of innovation. When working with actors, occasionally you run into some situations, which for me in this movie was a first, where you have to do some pretty weird things to make it work. For example, when Fulton was on the gurney being wheeled away, we never actually saw this. We never actually saw him on the cart being wheeled away because it was from a first-person point of view. What we did see was his shoes and his legs from the point of view of whoever was on the gurney. And that happened to be me as the camera operator for that particular shot. And part of that was I had to put on the actor's pants and shoes and socks in order to make that work. And he's a much skinnier man than I am, so if you actually saw this, it looks incredibly weird from a distance, but there you go. The other thing is, on the scene in the break room where you see him pulling pieces of his hair out with the assumption that something weird is going on in the lab causing people's hair to fall out, that was my hair. Because we didn't want to risk damaging his hair for the purposes of continuity. And so I actually cut some of my own hair off and had him hold it in his fingers. And, we seemed to get a little personal with the actors this time around, but it was nothing personal. It was all professional. It just looked kind of weird. As you'll see here, occasionally you can fix things in post. With the extras in the hallway, you see at one particular point my wife was directing the extras, and she is actually beckoning the guy in the white coat in the hallway to walk by the window as part of the shot, and she is in the shot doing so. And so normally that would be a problem, but since the camera was steady, we were able to fix that by actually taking a piece of the previous few moments and overlaying it over, in effect erasing her beckoning finger.
What happened between you and Tammy?
Let me get some water.
Okay, Louis Gagnon.
Can I just eat the whole thing and then wipe it off?
Actually, that'd probably be the best way.
Carry it to a sink.
So, tell us about your role in the project, Lou.
Oh, well, let's see. I have to reflect back on some things like, but well, it was an experience.
It's a good idea.
It's actually one of the first legitimate films that I've done for a legitimate crew of people who know what they're doing. And after I saw the finished edit version of the movie, I'm reassured of their competence because the special effects in this movie are outstanding. I recommend that you go down to your local theater and buy a bag of popcorn and see this movie because I think it came out wonderful. But again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I think the music and the special effects really made the scenes come more alive. It was a great help, and I enjoyed the cast. I enjoyed everyone working. I hope to work for these people again, this crew again, because they care about what gets out of the film. That's the bottom line. So.
Oh, good. Let me ask you something. Can you think of any particular scene in the film that was particularly interesting or fun to do?
I thought that I like the straight jacket thing and going crazy. I enjoyed doing that. I do that. I like the. I got a lot of them. I like the scene underneath the library and where the air conditioning ducts were, and we were going through there. I enjoyed that. I like the scenes about talking about the chamber, and whatnot. There's a lot of scenes I like. My favorite scene would probably have to be the straight jacket, going crazy, seeing the alien for the very first time, because that's a.
Yeah, you know.
And I enjoyed the scene I did with Lee Armstrong in the cafeteria. I thought that was a very good scene, and like I say, the music, because that scene really set everything clear. I enjoyed that scene, so there was a lot of them.
Okay, any advice to upcoming actors or other talent?
Me give advice on that? I don't know. Don't give up. Because trust me, you're going to find times when you're going to want to give up. You know, because it isn't easy. If you have to keep believing in yourself, don't wait for other people to believe in you, because you know, they're not going to be standing in line waiting to encourage you.
That almost defeated the purpose.
You know, so just don't give up on yourself. Keep believing in yourself. That's the best advice I can give.
Is that pure?
Is that pure what you